welcome back to the Cove. I won't spare too much time for introduction, but simply to tell you that today's story is Warwolf by the user John09101. April 6th, 1917. I used to love rainstorms, seeing gray skies creeping over fields, the soft rumbling of thunder on the horizon, watching lightning shoot from the sky in fiery theatrics, and the feeling of raindrops pitter-pattering on my cheek. It was one of those small things that don't mean much in the grand scheme of it all, but they brought a strange sense of subtle joy and reminded you that you were alive. But now, those feelings have been muddled with images that disgust me. Always waking up wet and cold, constantly being covered in mud, never having a stable, dry place to step or sleep, standing knee-deep in trenches filled with rainwater for days at a time, hoping I don't catch gangrene. In the 3 years since I joined the army in 1914, I have learned to hate the rain. Sitting in this dugout, finding some semblance of relief from the near constant deluge, I realize it has been some time since I've last written in this journal, or a letter back home. I know I promised Mary when I left I would write to her every day, and this journal has become one of the only things that is keeping me sane as a man can be in a hell like this. But I've seen too many nightmares. Nightmares Mary does not need to know about. We're in France, somewhere near Narrates, but it really wouldn't matter where we are. Ypres, Mons, Flanders, no matter where you are, the front stays the same. The gleam of fresh rust shimmering on the barbed wire after a rainstorm. The chalky taste of moldy biscuits and faint traces of petrol in our tea water. The coarse feeling of rats' whiskers rubbing against your flesh as they nibble at you while you sleep. The sounds from the loudest of artillery to the soft stabbing rhythm of train drops pelting our helmets. But the most striking and unmistakable sensation of them all is the ever-pervading stink and rot of the dead. Our company has been stationed here for some time now, about a couple of months. The routine here has been standard. We attack the Germans' trench, the Germans attack our trench, and then to settle the score, we attack their trench again. But a couple of weeks ago, aside from the odd sniper firing at us, those hunts have been suspiciously quiet. We've seen no evidence that they are planning a sneak attack, so the only thing that we can do for now is keep an eye on them. My day-to-day duties are simple enough. Keeping watch, carrying food and supplies up and down the line, draining out flooded trenches, laying out barbed wire, etc. The only challenging part of the job is keeping an eye on the new recruits. Since I'm a little older and supposedly wiser, they look to me for guidance, but most of them quickly get picked off like flies, simply because of how inexperienced they are. The shite they learn in basic training is worth next to nothing when you're out here, and no amount of training can prepare you for the enormous strain on your nerves living here will be. Just the other day I was with one. He was a young kid. Everyone could tell he lied about his age to the recruiters. I didn't know him for long, but in his eyes I saw the same naive idealism that I'd exhibited when I first signed up in 1914. But the war does not reward idealism. For his boyish stupidity, he was given a quick death. He stuck his head out long enough for a sniper to spot him. 1 minute, he's silently humming to himself. The next minute, what's left of his head has been splattered under the ground like a cracked egg. We buried him and a dozen other like him in a mass grave that afternoon. In a strange sense, they're the lucky ones. Most of us won't get the decency of being thrown in a shallow hole and having lime sprinkled on our carcasses. Once you die in no man's land, retrieving your body is more trouble than it's worth. So, most of us are fated to be left out here, to be food for the rats. With all the dreadful horrors that I am subjected to, I am thankful for the friends that I have here. Paul, a blacksmith's apprentice, and Harold, who was a simple farmer like me. These two men are the last of my friends from back home. Before the war, there were 10 of us. We all grew up with each other in childhood and looked to each other as brothers. We all signed up for service on the same day when the war broke out. We had bought the lies of patriotism and our, quote, duty to king and country that we were sold by our government. We survived basic training together, but were separated once we got to the front, with only Paul and Harold staying in my group. That was the last we saw of them. They all died on the same day, on the Somme, along with 10,000 other men. My other brothers in arms include Baker, who was an artist before the war and has since replaced his paintbrushes for a machine gun, but hasn't given up his old habits for fine wine and pretty French girls. And Plummer. He's the oldest of our group, and he almost acts as a mentor for the newer recruits, finding them food for them, making sure everyone isn't too rattled by artillery. He's a great comfort to us all. And then there's Piper. That's what we call him anyway. None of us really knows his name. Piper is an odd one to say the least. He's been with our company for a couple months now, and even still I don't really know anything about him. And he's never uttered a word to any of us. What I heard from the others is he's a Canadian, transferred to our company when his was all wiped out in a gas attack. Poor bastard went unconscious and was accidentally gathered up with the corpses and dumped into a ditch and buried alive. He probably would have suffocated down there if it weren't for the rats picking at him, waking him up. He had to dig himself out, rats biting and scratching at him as he clawed his way out of the very earth. By the time he got out, he was covered in bite marks and most of his right ear was gnawed off. That's hopefully all just rumor. I couldn't imagine going through something as terrible as that, but while no one knows for sure, his wide, bloodshot eyes tell a tale of horror the likes of which I dare not try to understand. His nickname being Piper is a bit of an odd joke. For whatever reason, no doubt being his abhorrent encounter with them, he has made it his personal crusade as the new Pied Piper of Hamlet to be our trench's resident rat catcher, luring the hungry little bastards out of their hiding spots with bits of bread so moldy even we can't eat them, and bashing them bloody with his trench shovel. He's killed hundreds, maybe even thousands of them, and he's not ashamed to show off his handiwork. He's fashioned himself something of a cloak with bloody, stinking rat pelts stitched together. As you can imagine, we try our best to give him distance. Then, of course, there's everyone's favorite member of our team, our fearless leader, Officer Abernathy. Furthering my suspicions that they come off conveyor belts, Abernathy is a typical officer, coming from a well-known family of military class, higher than I. He's a whiny posh who's handed a position with absolutely no experience to back himself up. He likes to boast and brag about his many accomplishments, his audience usually being any French whore that will give him the time of day for the right pay. He especially loves telling the tale of how he got his battle scar. A small, clean cut that goes across his left cheek. He'll tell you he got it killing a German who had tackled him to the ground and threatened to gut him with a bayonet. But if you ask anyone here, we've all heard the rumor that he gave it to himself to appear more intimidating to new recruits who didn't know any better. He's altogether a rather detestable and pathetic figure. He looks down on us common country rubes, especially me, for being of poor Irish birth, and he's willing to sacrifice all of our lives for a chance to catch some glory and impress the top brass. But you know for certain that while we're climbing into the jaws of hell and committing countless sins against our fellow man, he's conveniently nowhere to be found. He also isn't tolerant of any man that starts showing symptoms of shell shock. You see it in men that have been in here for too long, when the stress of everything has gotten to them. Something in their head just snaps and disintegrates, and they're in no condition to go on fighting. Oftentimes, they'll just sit in place, trembling and rocking back and forth, muttering to themselves, and looking out at nothing with lifeless eyes. But what Abernathy sees is a man that's unwilling to fight, trying to feign illness, a coward, and a potential deserter. And cowardice is not tolerated out here, not while he's around. He sent many of these poor souls away to be court-martialed, and from there they'd either be executed or sent to a madhouse, all because they couldn't be cogs in the wheel anymore. I wonder if the German officers are as intolerable as ours. I find myself thinking about the Germans a lot, wondering what they think about this damn war. Do they even care anymore if they were winning or losing? Did they even have a say in whether they wanted to be here? Were they as gung-ho about fighting and dying for their fatherland as we were to lay down our lives for king and country? When we would go over the top for a trench raid, we would usually end up taking a couple of Germans as prisoners, ones that surrendered once where all the chaos was over. Meeting them, you wouldn't think of them as the raping and pillaging ghouls we were told they would be. In fact, a lot of them looked frailer and more famished than us. Because of his art background, Baker is really the only one of us that can translate both French and German, so he did most of the work when it came to conversating. But even with the language barrier, most of us could still, in some way, empathize with the poor Huns. They weren't that much different from us. They had friends, families, children, hopes, dreams, and as we all come to understand, at least in a small way, the one unifying factor between us and them was that now all of our lives had no greater meaning than to be cannon fodder. Increasingly, I longed to be done with this accursed place and go back home. To the farm, my crops, my livestock, and of course to my wife Mary and our little girl Winnie. It's the little things that I miss the most, things that you take for granted. The smell of the crisp air on the early country morning, autumn. Walking through the wheat fields, the way fog settles on the moors in the early morning. The soft bleating of my sheep when I take them out for grazing, wrapping up a hard day's work and going to see my mates at the pub. The way Mary would hog the blankets while we slept and I would always wake up in the middle of the night near freezing. Even Winnie's cries in the middle of the night when she was a baby and would be akin to cherubs singing compared to the screams of agony you'll be subjected to around here. Yes, sir, if Lucifer himself appeared before me and told me that if I sold my soul to him and agreed to be a vessel for his wickedness, he would let me come back home to them, I would at least take a minute to think it over. But with that intense desire, there is also fear. A fear that has been slowly creeping into my mind for some time now. It's been 3 years since I left home. Winnie was just a toddler, about 3 or 4 years old. Now she would be around 6. 3 years of my little girl's life has passed by and I wasn't there to experience it, and I'll never get those years back. Not only have things back home changed, but I have changed as well. I used to be more heavyset, have more muscle on me. You need to have a body like that to run a farm. But due to the lack of food and the way we get run ragged out here, I have lost all of it and become emaciated. The lines on my face have become more pronounced. In 3 years' time, I've aged 10. The scars, the burns, and the calluses on my body, they all form a tapestry of barbarism on my flesh. Would Winnie recognize me if she saw me? Would Mary? Do I even recognize myself anymore? I fear that the man that I was when I left home is now dead. He died a long time ago in a no man's land. Whoever I am now is just wearing his skin in a pathetic attempt to impersonate him. I fear I may as well be a stranger to them now, as I am a stranger to myself. April 7th, 1917. I struggle to come to an explanation for what has happened tonight. It happened around 2 in the morning. It was frightfully cold and raining bullets, but through the clouds you could still make out the faint, shining profile of the full moon. I was halfway to dozing while on watch. The only thing keeping me awake was the distant sounds of shelling, chain smoking, and Baker's commentary while he ogled furiously over his collection of smutty photos. "Check this one out," he said. "She's a real beauty." He handed me a crumpled photo of a young woman in lingerie, smiling cheekily at the camera with her small, perky breast exposed. "You shouldn't be looking at stuff like that," I replied, trying to ignore her hypnotizing siren's gaze. He often forgets that I'm a married man. If my granny were here and saw us with that filth, she'd beat us black and blue with a spoon. If your granny was here, she'd go over, give the Kaiser a spanking, and the war would be over in a day. Suddenly, we were shaken by the thunderous, echoing roar of machine gun fire. Everyone went into position, ready for an attack. We were prepared to see a charging horde of hundreds of Germans rushing at us any minute, screaming bloody murder, channeling their barbarian ancestors. I shook and shivered as I clung to my rifle, but it wasn't just because of the cold. No matter how many trench defenses I'd been through, the fear of death is always still with me. "How many Huns are there?" Baker whispered to me. I sneakily crawled up to the edge of the trench, scanning no man's land, being careful not to poke my head out too much for fear of a sniper. It was impossible to see anything in the storm. Someone shot off a flare, and I was surprised to find that, with the added visibility, there was nothing. No man's land was empty. Not even the rats were scurrying. The Germans weren't advancing. "They aren't charging towards us at all," I said, confounded. "What the hell are they shooting at?" "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's big." I grabbed the nearby telescope, hoping to get a better look, but it was hard to make anything out. The Germans were a good 300-400 yards away from us, across a blown-apart, uneven terrain, and no one's vision is good in a rainstorm. The only thing I could really see was their muzzle flashes. They were shooting erratically, as if they were firing at a moving target, and whatever it was in their trench. I really had no idea what to make of it. And then, what I can only be described as a loud, blood-curdling howl, a howl that didn't sound like any beast or man that I or anyone else had ever heard before, shattered our eardrums. It was like whatever was making that sound was right in the trench with us. It was that loud. Even now, hours later, I can still feel the vibrations rattling in my bones. Then came the screaming. Painful, shrill cries of horror and agony that were sharply cut short. In a matter of minutes, everything went quiet. We all stood there in shock and bewilderment. What on earth could have happened over there? Did we even want to know? Abernathy came out of his hiding spot and probably ordered us to sneak over to the Hun's trench and investigate the situation. "I don't think that's a good idea, sir," I protested. "It's too risky. For all we know, it could be the Germans luring us into a trap." That was the only logical conclusion that I could come to. It's not like the Huns haven't pulled tricks on us before, or we haven't to them. But admittedly, even that explanation was flimsy. I got a bad feeling about the whole thing, and didn't want to see me or any of the others going up there to possibly meet our maker. Unfortunately, our officer is not one to take constructive criticism. With his hand on his holster, he ordered me up over the top first under threat of execution for cowardice. So, I capitulated, grabbed a flare gun, and was on my way. It's difficult to explain the feeling of sneaking through no man's land at night. Fear doesn't quite do it justice. No does dread or disgust. I can only try to paint a picture of it. Crawling through a sea of thick, putrid mud with the smell and consistency of spoiled porridge, or at least you hope it's mud. You might have just stuck your hand or foot in whatever's left of your mate's face, the one that bought the farm 3 or 4 weeks ago and is left out here to rot. Cutting your way slowly, inch by inch, through the yards of sprawling, rusty barbed wire, while trying not to run into the haunting husks of fallen men who were caught on the wire and are now being pecked at by crows like ghastly carrion. The gnarled, twisted shapes of what were once tall, healthy trees in a quaint country forest, scarred and burnt by years of artillery shrapnel and bullet holes. Being on the lookout for any German traps, mines, or snipers waiting in the dark. Navigating the labyrinthian mazes of abandoned trenches and traverses. Being wary not to fall into waterlogged shell holes and dugouts, where underneath the green, putrid rainwater could be hiding hundreds of corpses rotting away to sludge. Hearing the cacophony of buzzing and gnawing from rats, flies, and maggots, happily gorging themselves carefree on what no doubt to them is a bountiful harvest of dead, decaying flesh. I could go on, but even writing this down is making my stomach turn. I finally make it to the German's trench, and immediately I'm hit by the smell. It brought back memories of being a boy, helping my pa deal our hogs to the local slaughterhouse. I always hated having to go. The trip there always gave me a sense of dread. Even from a mile away, you could still smell the putrid stench of butchered swine, and hear the shrill cries of the petrified hogs. I imagine that hell smelled like that, and considering I've been serving a couple of years in it, the comparison isn't inaccurate. Having accepted the possible fate of being cut down immediately in a German trap, I said a quick prayer and crawled into the trench. I lost my footing and fell face first into what I thought was more mud, but the sickeningly sweet, iron taste proved me wrong. My hands trembling, I reached for my matches and struck a flame, and I realized that I had stumbled into a horror show. In 3 years' time, I've seen just about every ghastly way that a man can meet his maker. I've seen them shot, bayoneted, clubbed to death with trench shovels, burnt to crisp by flamethrowers, and blown to bits by grenades and artillery. I've had to hold back tears as I watch poor kids, shaking and sniveling and crying for their mothers, get shot in the face by their own officers for failing to go over the top. I've seen men trip off duckboards and get caught in quicksand, suffocating in thick mud and sludge, others frozen stiff in their dugouts after a brutal snowstorm. I've seen new recruits falling prey to phosgene and mustard gas, their eyes swelling out of their sockets, coughing up their lungs in bloody clots. I've walked by the twisted moraines of cavalrymen that were trampled and crushed by their poor horses after getting mowed down by machine guns in a fatal charge. We would gather in the trenches and look at the skies when a dogfight would take place, and all wince and look away when the flying aces would fall from the heavens in a hellish, fiery inferno. I've had to hold my vomit while scrubbing off the bloody pulp of men who were crushed under the weight of heavy metal tank tracks. I've had to put a rag over my face while walking through the infirmaries, watching the weak and wounded with their gangrenous wounds slowly expire of flu, dysentery, typhus, and other assorted plagues and ailments, all while being eaten alive by ravenous fleas, lice, and rats. I've heard the rumors of Germans crucifying a young Canadian boy to a barn door, and witnessed the Canadians' retaliation in the form of them scalping the bloody Huns with Bowie knives and making necklaces of their ears. But what I saw in that trench was a different type of savagery. There weren't bodies, just parts. Intestines sprawled out all over the walls and ground like crimson vines, steaming in the frigid air. Half-eaten limbs thrown about, chewed with viscera and gnawed on the bones. Blood by the gallon being rinsed off the duckboards from the rain and draining into the sump below. I tried with all my might not to vomit or faint from shock. What unsettled me the most was how quiet it was there. You couldn't even hear the rats. It felt like the Reaper was standing right there in the trench with you. I gathered my senses after a bit and lit off my flare. The others wouldn't believe what was here. Suddenly, I heard a creak behind me and swung over, my rifle ready with a round in the chamber. The sound came from a large piece of rusty sheet metal up against the wall. "Whoever's back there better come out right now. Come raus, on the hook," I shouted, trying to remember what rudimentary German I had picked up. They sheepishly came out of their hiding spot. 2 Huns and a Frenchie, all 3 trembling and pale-faced. The Frenchman was babbling incoherently to himself. "Christ almighty," Plummer coughed out, crossing himself at the side of the place. He and others had made their way through no man's land and were now looking down into the trench. "What the hell happened to the Boche?" cried out Paul, gagging as he forced the question. "Place looks like a bloody butcher shop." "Smells like one too," Harold said with a handkerchief over his mouth in a vain attempt to relieve himself of the stench. "Looks like our luck started to turn in our favor, boys," Abernathy declared. "We must have finally gotten those Huns with our artillery." "Sir, I don't think this is artillery," I said, pointing to my evidence. "Look at the bodies. They aren't singed or burnt. In the trench, it's still in stable shape." He wasn't having it and just ignored me. To be honest, I don't really think he cared how the whole thing happened. Charlie Chaplin could have swooped down and made the Huns laugh to death with slapstick routine, and it wouldn't have made a difference to him so long as his hands didn't have to get dirty. Me and Baker were ordered to take the men somewhere to interrogate them while he seized the opportunity to secure the trench, no doubt imagining the medals he could be winning for this. We took them to a dugout and sat them down, and after looking around I managed to find some of the Huns' rum rations to help calm them down. After they settled down, Baker began to translate their tale. The 2 Germans were named Otto and Hans. The Frenchie was Albert. Albert had been captured by them a few weeks ago in a failed scouting mission and was being held for information. Proving my suspicions were correct, the Germans were planning a sneak attack. They had been digging a tunnel under no man's land, their plan being to burrow underneath of us, plant some explosives, and blow us all to Kingdom Come. They had been working on it for some time in the secret, and they had made good progress. They would have been under our feet in a matter of days. That is until tonight, when it came for them. At first, they thought they were being ambushed, and in a sense, they were. But not by us, or the French, or any man at all. It was an animal, one they had never seen before. Whatever it was big, mean, and ravenous for flesh and blood. None of their guns did anything to it. Otto said he saw the thing take a full belt from a Maxim gun like it was nothing, and proceeded to tear through the gunner's inside with its giant claws like a hot knife through butter. Otto and Hans barely escaped from the massacre and joined Albert in hiding behind the sheet metal. They were the only ones left. That's when Albert, taking a belt of rum, chokily spoke up. "Loup-garou," he said, trying to calm the shiver in his tone. "That's what it was. That loup-garou." It was a story that his father had told him as a child, to frighten him not staying up past his bedtime. The tale goes back hundreds of years ago, when the first gypsies came to France, sometime in the 15th century. A small caravan of them came to settle in the outskirts of a small French village, a village whose name and location have long since been forgotten. The caravan was made up mostly of women and children, and kept to themselves. But in the town there lived a wealthy land baron, who was appalled at the idea of sharing land with foreign street trash. So, he whipped the villagers up into a dogmatic fury and formed a mob. On a moonlit night, they stormed the camp, slaughtered every man, woman, and child there, and pilfered their corpses for any potential loot, the Baron having a particular fixation for silver. The Baron found the leader of the camp, a frail old woman trapped in the burning wreckage of one of the wagons. Upon seeing the giant ornate silver crucifix she was clutching, he became overwhelmed with greed and grabbed her, ripping it from her old, withered hands. It was in that moment that the old woman placed a curse upon the Baron. Under the light of the moon, your soul and body will live eternal as a wolf to feast on the flesh of man. The bastard paid no mind to the old witch's ravings, and having won his trophy, he chucked her into the fire and left her to burn. The crowd destroyed all evidence of the camp's existence, and their crime was swept under the rug, life continuing as normal. But as weeks passed, the Baron began to change. His temper became explosive and erratic. Even the sight of his once coveted silver sent him off into a blind rage. His appetite for food and drink turned gluttonous, and his debaucherous lust turned into ravenous. Having become a pariah to his community, he became a recluse, refusing to leave the halls of his castle. Then, under the light of the full moon, he underwent a horrifying metamorphosis. His body began to grow and contort. Thick black fur sprouting from his skin, he grew monstrous teeth and claws. His mind regressed to the base anger and hunger of an animal. He had become loup-garou, or man-wolf in English. With his new form, he gorged himself on everything in the village in the span of a single night, leaving nothing in his hungry rampage but a ghost town full of bones. He fled into the woods, and soon the village faded from memory, reclaimed by the forest. But the legend of the monster persisted, as sightings were reported through the ages, always on nights of the full moon, hiding in the darkest corners of the wood and doomed to an eternity of never-ending hunger. When we relayed the story to Abernathy, he swiftly wrote the whole thing off as superstitious poppycock, and as much as it pains me to say it, I would have agreed with him. I'm not one to easily believe in tales of curses and monsters. After all, I'm a soldier. The only monsters around here have human hearts. But Albert believed it, and those two Germans believed him. And I honestly struggle to come up with a logical explanation. What on earth could have happened here? Abernathy has ordered us to stay in the Germans' trench, holding the line until reinforcements can come. But it's looking like we might have to spend the night. Rumors have been floating around of an offensive happening several miles up the trench. HQ is going to prioritize that over us. We spent the morning gathering the dead, shoveling what remains were left into sandbags and throwing them into a pit to burn. No words or prayers were spoken. Not out of malice, we just couldn't think of anything to say that would have made the situation better. We've been living in these trenches for too long, seen too much of the world's cruelties. It's hard for most of us to still believe in any higher powers. I struggle to hold on to faith, though I dare not mention that in my letters to Mary, for fear that she'd come down here and slap me for blasphemy. If there was any woman to do such a thing, it would be her. Our prisoners aren't having a good time either. They've been thrown into a pillbox, and Piper's been in charge of keeping an eye on them. Baker volunteered to help, and those Huns ought to be thankful they're lucky stars that he did. Piper can be a cruel bastard to German prisoners. Whether he's overseen corralling prisoners, it isn't uncommon to find them with fresh bruises and lost keepsakes. We're all creeped out by the guy, so no one's had the guts to stop him. Even Abernathy doesn't dare try. But even Piper's non-verbal threats to lop their heads off with a shovel aren't doing anything to snap those three out of hysterics. They've been trying to get us to leave all day, and Albert's helping to whip the two into a frenzy with his monster nonsense. He keeps telling us that we need to leave immediately, that the wound will be full enough again tonight, and this loup-garou will come back to kill us all. None of us really believe his ravings, or admit to believing it, but none of us want to stay here. As I write this, it is 5 p.m., and the sun is starting to set. For once the rain around here has stopped. It feels like ages since the last time I saw the setting sun. It means we'll have clear skies tonight. Albert was knocked out for trying to escape, and Otto and Hans have been tied up and left to sit in a dugout. We're trying to keep spirits up, but I think we're all afraid. I know I am. There's a feeling in the air, like we're being watched. I just hope for mine and everyone else's sake that reinforcements are sent as soon as we can get the hell away from here. And thus concludes Part 1 of Warwolf by the user John09101. What a harrowing introduction to this tale. These men caught in trenches, fighting wars for people they've never met, for people they'll never see, over land that they've never seen. Or will, I imagine, should they survive. I will return soon with Part 2, and subsequently Part 3. But in the meantime, I don't know. What do humans do, other than kill each other and look at their nudie magazines?